and there's just a few jihadists who are getting in the way, you know, that finally was not a believable position. And it really undermined and discredited many of the positive, concrete goals of the administration. So this is the kind of thing I think Mahoney is talking about. For Mahoney, the meaning of 9/11 has less to do with the persistence of terrorism as a major phenomenon, and much more to do with what that event revealed about profound, intractable separations that continue to divide humanity. The self-destruction of European communism, of which the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 was both emblem and reality, led many on both sides of the Atlantic to erroneously believe that mankind was moving in principle and in practice toward full unification. 9/11 should have shattered that illusion. On its eve, intellectual elites continued to speak glibly about a difference and the right of difference. They trusted in liberal instruments of rapprochement, commerce, and communications. Alas, the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 revealed, again to quote Mahoney, that communication does not produce community. The most perfected instruments of commerce and communications remain external to the life of peoples and are far from uniting them as liberal and progressive opinion hoped or counted on since the 18th century. Mahoney issues a bracing call for citizens of the Western democracies to free themselves from liberal and progressivist illusions. To cite some qualified criticisms of American foreign policy, Mahoney is with the United States in his recognition of the persistence of conflict in a world driven by political, cultural, and spiritual divisions. Again, I think that was one problematic, really profoundly problematic dimension of the rhetoric of the Bush administration, particularly of President Bush's second inaugural address. The assumption was that the love of liberty is such a profound motive of the human soul. It's the most important impulse, etc. And that if unnatural obstacles are removed, that impulse will come to dominate. So despite the present difficulties, despite the threat of terrorism, despite the challenge of jihadism, in principle, the assumption was, or the implication was, we're sort of on the road to the end of history, you know, to this triumph of the most powerful motive in human. And odd for an evangelical Christian to sort of forget that the drama of good and evil in the human soul, the threat of tyranny, the persistence of evil is permanent. That there will be no end of history. There will be no fundamental end to the challenges that face humanity. That liberal democracy as a form of benign political civilization is not the universal future of humankind. You know, Prime Minister Blair and President Bush, two men I really respect, had the annoying habit of regularly telling us that it was cultural condescension to hold that democracy depends on specific cultural and political traditions. Tony Blair once said that it was racist to say that liberty was any less possible in Monrovia and Baghdad than London and Washington. Well, he didn't hear Professor Watson's talk earlier today. It's not racism, it's not cultural condescension, it's a recognition of the complicated mixture of the universal in particular that informs a regime of liberty. That there are aspects of human experience in the human soul. No one wants to be ruled by a despot, but that doesn't mean that the human hostility to despotism somehow guarantees the triumph of human liberty. I just want to say a word about how this all relates to our present discontents. Mahoney's analysis suggests that the problem with American foreign policy is that it's sometimes that the legitimate opposition to European passivity is sometimes tied to a bit of hubris and America's own brand of democratic dogmatism. I think there's something to that argument. My guess, however, is with an Obama administration, the problems we're going to have to worry about is not the excesses of American sovereignty, or the excesses of some of the problems with associated, let's say, with the Bush administration and the Bush doctrine. The problems are going to be much more the Europeanization of American foreign policy. And I would say this, perhaps practical responsibilities will lead President Obama to act in ways that are not all that distinct in some crucial regards from his predecessor. But on the other hand, everything suggests, if you read his, it's quite remarkable, we have a president-elect who's written 2 memoirs at the age of 47. If you read his memoirs, if you listen carefully to the political speeches that were given over the last interminable 2 years of our unending, permanent presidential campaign, you'll see that Obama talks like a European. He talks about walls coming tumbling down. He announced in Berlin last May in his little victory tour of Europe. He won the election in Europe, and I'm not talking about the vote among American expatriates. He announced in Berlin that he was both a proud citizen of the world, of the United States, and a fellow citizen of the world. He spoke about the need to welcome, to think in terms of the globalized community of nations and not the specific interests of nation states. He spoke about the need to overcome antiquated ways of thinking if we are to build what he calls a more hopeful world. And in a prominent place in his speech, he spoke about the prospects for international unity, a unity in which many walls will fall. And I quote, "The walls between the countries with the most and those with the least." That's the North-South distinction, beloved by liberals. "The walls between races and tribes, natives and immigrants, Christians and Muslim and Jew." And he also spoke of the Berlin Wall coming down. And as one commentator pointed out, he speaks of the fall of the Berlin Wall as if no one pushed it or ever stood guard by. So I think at a minimum, our president-elect tends to think, his default position, you might say, is to think like many European elites in terms of this sort of telos pushing us toward unification, the overcoming of difference, etc., etc. On the other hand, no doubt the responsibilities of the President of the United States will remind him on an hourly basis of the multiple sources of division and conflict in the contemporary world. Thank you very much.